Hello friends, my name is Moniz, and today I'll be talking about all of the books that I read last month. Typically, in any given year, I set my reading goal in 3 parts. So the bottom rung is 52 books a year, a book a week, 4 to 5 books a month. And then the second tier is 72 books, so 6 books a month. And I'm usually reading in that 6 to 7 book a month range. On really good months, it's like 9 to 10. And last month, I read 30 books. This is not unheard of for me. I read 30 books last December, but because I challenged myself to do so, I did a whole vlog project about it. And this time it just happened because I read a lot of romance and because I wasn't feeling well. So I was spending a lot of time in bed reading. So 30 books. I'm going to tell you about those books and what I thought of them, but first I'll tell you that this video is being sponsored by Book of the Month. Book of the Month is an online book service with a mission to promote new and emerging authors and to help readers find books that they love. Each month you get a selection of new or early release titles, and their service is risk-free, so you can always skip a month. If you are in the US and you are interested in trying Book of the Month, you can use my code, which is Moniz, and you can get your first box for $9.99. That is one hardcover book for $9.99 with the code Moniz. You guys know I love this service. I've been talking about loving the service for so many years now, and I'm super happy to share with you guys the picks for September. First up is Beautiful Country by Julie Hoang. This is a memoir that details the author's experience immigrating to the United States in the 90s. Her parents were professors in China, but in New York they ended up working in sweatshops to make ends meet, and so her story really delves into those circumstances, but also delves into the weight and pressure that this put on their family situation. Next is Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This is about a married couple whose marriage is experiencing some strain. Adam has face blindness, so he can't recognize family, friends, or even his wife, and Alice is tired of feeling unseen in this marriage. And then this couple wins a trip to Scotland. They both realize that this is kind of make it or break it for their marriage, but it turns out that their trip to Scotland isn't all that random, and one of them has a big secret. Next is The Neighbor's Secret by Allison Heller. This book is set in Cottonwood Estates, which is described as sort of the perfect place to raise children, and there is a book club in this neighborhood, and they tend to read more like thriller and murder mystery type books, and they feel safe to do so because nothing like that would ever happen in their neighborhood until things like that start happening in their neighborhood. There are attacks on each of the members of the book club, and they start to escalate in violence, and so the women of the book club have to come together to protect their families, even if that means someone has to die. Next is The Sweetest Remedy by Jane Agaro. In this, the main character travels to Nigeria for her father's funeral, even though she never really knew her father, and while she's there, she meets her very well-to-do family. She's accepted by some members of her family and some not so much, but she's determined to learn more about who she is and where she comes from, and to uncover some secrets and also fall in love. And finally, The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. Olive Smith is a third-year PhD candidate, and she was briefly dating a guy who now her best friend is interested in, but her best friend would never make a move on him. So in order to convince her best friend that she can totally make a move on this guy, Olive decides that she has to fake date someone. So she kisses the first man she comes across, and it happens to be the grouchy hotshot professor of the department. Olive is super surprised when he agrees to cover for her and in fact keep fake dating her. This would have 100% been my pick for September, and in fact I already read this one. I will start my reviews here just to tell you how freaking much I love this book. I think it is one of my favorite books that I've read this year, and certainly one of my favorite romances that I've read this year. I'm very hesitant to overhype this for people because I wouldn't go into this expecting that you will find a lot unique necessarily, but it does all of the tropes that it does so charmingly. I found myself giggling to myself, like out loud giggling while turning the pages in this. I thought it was easy to root for the main character, and because this is set in an academic setting, anybody who has ever been in an academic setting will see things here to relate to. Obviously, I'm not a PhD student or a scientist, but there were still moments like the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, the dealing with professors who apparently have nothing better to do with their time than make students cry, all of that. All of that was so well represented here and made it so easy to root for Olive. And then you have Adam, who's the grouchy professor. Grumpy Sunshine is a trope that I really like, and I think that this did it well. I think it did it well because while Adam himself is a grumpy character, and you get to see kind of why he is the way that he is, he's never mean to the main character. There isn't that line or boundary cross where you feel bad about shipping these two together. I saw what both of them saw in each other, and this did feel really slow burn in a way, even though they're fake dating and they kiss a couple of times kind of under duress. It isn't until the last 25% of the book that they meaningfully accept what they mean to each other and move on that attraction. So the slow burn of it, the fake dating of it, the grumpy sunshine of it was just all so well done, and I highly recommend this book. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Another book of the month book that I read was The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. This is the third book in her series of related romances. I guess the first thing that I have to say about this is that it wasn't what I was expecting. In the previous 2 entries, the common threads are this family, Quan, his brother, and his cousin are the male romantic leads. Also, a main character always has autism, and there are some heavier subject matters throughout. I think in the previous 2 entries, there was a more defined balance between those heavier subject matters and some of the romantic banter and the dates and things of that nature, where this just felt darker and heavier overall. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I think romance can be a really great vehicle to explore darker or heavier themes, and people meet each other and fall in love in all stages of life. I just wasn't expecting it here. So almost immediately, first page, first scene, something is happening that is incredibly uncomfortable, and was my first indication that this was a little bit different than I expected. And when I finished the book, that was the primary impression I was left with, of this being not quite what I expected from the previous entries, because of this very beautiful and cutesy cover, and that just not matching at all what the contents of the book are. That said, this past weekend I was able to meet up with some friends I hadn't seen in a while, and I talked about this book 3 different times with 3 different people who had read the book, people who hadn't read the book. I was just explaining the premise and the things that happened, and it was through those conversations that I realized that this was heavy in my head. I was thinking about it a lot, and there were so many things represented here in terms of getting a diagnosis, in terms of dealing with family who don't understand mental health and who might not take your diagnosis seriously, in terms of caring for parents, and it was just so many things that I feel were that heavy, as I keep saying, because they were well represented. The relationship at the heart of it I liked, but it just isn't, I don't know, it didn't feel typical in the sort of romantic banter and the dates and the falling in love because of where the 2 characters are in their life. They come together in a way that didn't feel really traditional, and then I can't look back on and be oh, the cutesy moment. There wasn't a lot of cute here. It was just a lot of heart-wrenching. And even the happily ever after at the end still had this thread of sadness, but I still a vast improvement for both our characters. So overall, just really interesting, really well done, well written, and well represented. A little bit different feeling than what we had seen before from Hoang, and definitely check out content warnings and be prepared when you go into this. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Those were both book of the month books, so if you're interested in trying out the service, once again, my code is Moniz, and I will have all the details in the description. Next, I read Milk Blood Heat by Dantiel and Moniz. This is a collection of short stories, and it is tied together by place. They are all set in Florida, and it is also strongly tied together by theme. It is a lot about family, and specifically about motherhood. First of all, I have a whole shelf on Goodreads dedicated to books that are set in Florida, because I just think that's really fun when I find books set in Florida, and I love books in general that are strongly tied to place. And because I am from Florida, this is a place that I know pretty intimately, I love having that extra layer of sort of understanding into a book. But apart from that specific to me thing, this was truly a fantastic collection of short stories. It was incredibly polished and very effective. perspective. I found myself both incredibly uncomfortable while reading and made that way through the realizations that the characters were making. It felt like each story was a series of realizations or coming to terms with certain things within the characters' lives. There were all of these sort of like aching feelings and feelings of longing baked into each of the stories. And what makes a short story successful to me is that feeling that each story is complete unto itself, or that it feels like the beginning and end, or what the author shows us like makes a sort of sense. And that's how it felt in these stories, that I felt like I understood the snapshot, that I felt like each story was full enough to stand on its own, but that left us off like kind of wanting more. And it added to that sort of aching feeling, the fact that we don't get more, that we got to see such intimate and tender portraits of all of these characters and then are just kind of left off at certain points. So all of that was done incredibly well. This was super well crafted. Next, I read I Want to Be Where the Normal People Are by Rachel Bloom, which is a collection by Bloom about her childhood, growing up in the theater, becoming a writer, her experiences as a writer in writers' rooms, and of course, writing and creating her show, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. With works like this, the selling point is always, are you a fan of the author, of the celebrity author? Which I love Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. We dedicated a podcast episode to it. I actually saw Crazy Ex-Girlfriend live in Portland with my best friend for her 30th birthday, and the memories around all of that are just some of my favorite. The audiobook experience was great because Bloom has these moments where she's talking directly to the listener or describing things that are in the book, which you can tell are like specific to the audiobook. So I had a ton of fun just hearing her read out her own experiences and hearing all of the energy that she brings to this written work. I will say, if you are a fan of Bloom and that sort of chaotic energy that she brings, the audiobook is a good choice. If you're kind of questioning this because you're not so much a fan of that chaotic energy, probably read the book because it will give you some distance between her voice and your own reading. But this is another book that after reading, I brought up two instances in this book to people, like anecdotes. Like, so one is Harry Potter fan fiction that she wrote, which she acknowledged J.K. Rowling being problematic, but in context you kind of get why she kept the fan fiction in. And it was just she says like, I don't know, this is really good fan fiction, I want to keep it in. And after I read it, I was like, that was really good fan fiction. So that was great. And the other is like all of her thoughts about theme parks and Disney World, and basically her take that the correct amount to be into Disney is the amount that she's into Disney, which I appreciate. So tons of moments like that were really genuinely funny. A lot of moments that made my heart go out to her and her experience of growing up and feeling a little bit ostracized, but also with sort of like the clear-eyed view of a 30-year-old woman kind of looking back and saying, yeah, there were times I could have handled things differently. I had a good time listening. As with her humor, it lands with me like 90 to 95% of the time. Sometimes it goes a little too potty humor and I'm like, okay. But otherwise, a great collection. And I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read all 13 books in the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs. I won't tell you across how many days because you'll be like, Maddie, are you okay and did you sleep? And the answer to both things is no. I am going to do a full series review. This needs a dedicated video. I'm not going to review every book here, but I will say that I had such an interesting experience. And there are some things that Patricia Briggs does so well. Obviously, these were like really addictive. They tend to be a little formulaic, but in a way that it was exactly what I needed in the moment. There are some representation things that work not as well. And so it's really hard. Like at first I was like, well, these are older. and then as it kept going, I was like, no, she's trying. Briggs has a really diverse cast, but there are certain comments that you can tell are just off the mark. Like I said, I will do a full series review and really get into the nitty-gritty of what the series is like and the highs and lows of it, and why, even though each individual book is like three and a half stars for me. Like the collective experience is a lot higher. And also this is like more entertainment than quality for me. Like the entertainment value is way higher than I feel like the quality is. But then also the entertainment kind of influences that quality. Like obviously there's some secret sauce here that is working for me. So yeah, I don't know. We'll give a collective 4 stars to the Mercy Thompson novels. And then high off the success of reading books in a series, I returned to the In Death series by J.D. Robb. So I read Holiday in Death and Conspiracy in Death, which are number 7 and 8 in the series. I would give Holiday in Death like 3.5 stars and Conspiracy in Death 3 stars. I don't have many individual thoughts about these because again, they are very formulaic. I am enjoying Eve Dallas as a main character and all of the side characters that are being introduced, and her relationship with Rourke is really interesting to me. It started off really bad. I almost didn't make it past book 1 because of all of the I don't know, there were weird consent things and like the way that he pushes her, and that has evolved into a place where it's like he knows what she needs, and it often involves like pushing her, but she likes it. And so, it is less bad than it was when the series started, but it's still at a place that every so often it catches me off guard or makes me uncomfortable. But in general, it's improving as the series goes along. So I'm picking these up for when I need brain off reads and I don't have any other feelings beyond that. Okay, so that is kind of a bridge into the romance books that I read this month, starting with something that was making the rounds on TikTok. So I started to see a lot of TikToks about a Minotaur romance. Most of what I was seeing was a lot of like tee-heeing about it, and I really couldn't tell for good or for bad, like were people enjoying it, were people laughing at it or laughing with it, but either way, I was like, okay, let's go figure out what this is about. And the book in question is called Morning Glory Milking Farm and it is by C.M. Nascosta. And when I looked her up on Amazon, I saw that she actually had another book, which is called Girls Weekend. And it is actually the first in this like related series of books. So in Girls Weekend, 3 elves decide to take a girls weekend and they go into like a nudist hotel, like a nudist org hotel, and they just want to live it up for the weekend, but things don't go as planned for any of them. And so we follow their 3 individual adventures. And in this, the premise was a lot better than the execution. I felt like the 3 stories were a little disjointed, especially there was one that didn't feel romantic at all. And so its inclusion here was a little weird and a little undone. Also, the writing wasn't the best. As I was reading, there were like typos and things like that. But the thing that frustrated me the most was sort of like some time jumps and things that the author was doing. And it wasn't specific to one character, it was across the board. We would start the scenes and it would take off, and all of a sudden the character would be describing something, and then you would realize that what they were describing was in the past before the scene started, and then they would pick up where the scene left off. And so a lot of times I was in the middle of something and I didn't know when it was happening, and it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, she was telling us about the time jump from last scene to this scene, but not in chronological order. I mentioned this on TikTok and somebody said they took that as being something that happens to people who are not neurotypical, the way that they process time, which is a fine explanation. But again, it happens across the board as a storytelling thing and not specifically to a character, like a way that they are processing, but a way that the author is telling us the story. And so even if it is a thing where it's like neuroatypical or a different way of telling the story, it still has to make sense to the reader. And too many times I felt confused by the action that was happening because it wasn't clear to me exactly what we were doing or how we were processing. So this one was like meh to me. It was like 2.5 stars overall. Moving on to Morning Glory Milking Farm. In this one we are in Canebrick Creek, which is where the 3 elves are from, but we follow a human character in Morning Glory. She is somebody who has recently graduated from grad school and is barely making ends meet and is drowning under student loans, and signs up for this job that is really well paying but doesn't have a lot of details about what exactly it is. So she shows up up to orientation. And in this world, they have these milking farms for minotaurs because what they milk from the minotaurs actually helps human men, like Viagra does. So they have these milkmaids that work at these milking farms. And so she decides to go through with it because the pay is too good and she just needs to get out from under these loans. There she meets a minotaur and she kind of makes a connection with him. This one was so much more interesting because the writing was a little bit better and there was all this kind of commentary that wasn't like necessarily super subtle. It was a little on the nose, a little heavy-handed, but it was still interesting that it included all of this commentary about like late stage capitalism and like the sorts of jobs that you take on just because you need to work, and the fact that she couldn't find like meaningful employment after going through grad school and taking on all of this debt. And also it talked about sex work and how a lot of sex work is context and how these milkmaids didn't consider themselves sex workers because of the nature of what they were doing. And so all of that was just really, really interesting tidbits in the story that was like otherwise about like a bunch of hand jobs. So I was pleasantly surprised, especially because I didn't have such a great experience with the first book, but this one was a lot more interesting. I will say that like half a star deducted because you get to the end and the author includes a picture of what the minotaur looks like. And like, I know what a minotaur is, but while reading this, my brain, I guess for its own purposes, for protecting itself, was just like imagining what I could deal with, you know, the limit of what I could imagine and still be into the story or still process the story. But when you get to the end and she shows a picture of a minotaur and it is literally like cow head to foot, I was like, oh no. And that took away a lot of my enjoyment in retrospect, like the snout, like the hair. I couldn't. Nothing against monster romance, but it was just a picture. I wish she had left that part to every reader's imagination. But she didn't. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I read It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This follows an influencer named Piper who is known for being wealthy and pretty and sort of a wild child. But one day, a party she throws gets out of hand and she lands in jail. So her stepfather kind of draws a line in the sand and says no more and ships her off to go learn some responsibility while running her late father's dive bar. And so she knows very little about her father, about where her father's from, or about running a bar. And so you have Piper trying to make this dive bar a success because she feels like that will prove to her stepfather that she's responsible, but also catching feelings for this gruff sea captain guy. This was my first Tessa Bailey and I had heard really good things primarily over on TikTok. And I will say that I read this very quickly and there were portions of the story that I enjoyed, but overall, some of the dynamics were not really up my alley. You get the sort of out of the gate antagonism between Brendan and Piper because she's like cute and blonde and not from around there. So that antagonism just makes Brendan look like a jerk for no reason because there really isn't a reason for him to react the way that he does to her. And the fact that it kind of switches so quickly highlights that. And I don't know if this is true for all Tessa Bailey books, but I read a second one, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But it seems to me that her men tend to be like these gruff jerks who dirty talk. And it's not my favorite because there isn't enough in her sort of like grumpy men to show why the women would be interested in them. Like why... You know, you're just being a jerk most of the time. So I don't understand. There were times when Piper's bit was a little more relatable that I felt for her. And there were times that I'm like, suck it up. You're rich and white and your punishment is to inherit property. Like, I don't, like the complaining here, I know it's a romance, but I don't know. The complaining was sort of like beyond my enjoyment at points. But there were times that the two of them together were cute when they were out shopping, when she was worried about him, and like the grand gesture at the end was plenty cute. So I had a little bit of a mixed experience. I see why some people might consider this like much better than I did or a favorite, but there were just a few things that were particularly not for me. me. So I gave this like 3.5 out of 5 stars. From there, I read Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey, which is the first book in the Hot and Hammered series. And again, this was one that had like cute moments, but the guy I didn't really like at all. He didn't have enough charming bits or soft bits to endear me to him. It just seemed like too much grouch for me. And overall, the premise of everything was a little bit too much and somewhat disjointed. Like, she's a clown. She works as a clown, but also she's trying to renovate her house. And he's a childhood friend, but also he offers to fix a portion of her house. And there's this club portion of it. So it was like one too many things going on. And I wish the story had been stripped down a little bit. The clown thing really threw me off. Not that people aren't clowns at children's party, but that piece of the storytelling felt so different than everything else. I don't know. It was super weird. And then the whole thing is that the main character feels very infantilized by her family. Like, they don't take her seriously because she is the baby, because she is a clown. But then because Tessa Bailey's thing is like these gruff, dirty talkers, he very much infantilizes her too. Like, he's supposed to be the one telling her, you can do it, you stand up to your family. But also in the moments of their passion, it just read very baby kinkish sometimes. So it's like, how does this fit in with what you're trying to tell us is happening here? It doesn't. So I enjoyed this one a lot less. 2.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett Clair, and this is going to be the second book that I covered for my like reading popular TikTok books series. I started this book after I finished From Blood and Ash, so like back in April or May, and it took me pretty much that long to read it because I was so freaking bored. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling, but it's like set in modern day. Persephone is like 20 in this, even though all of the other gods are immortal. Don't ask me what Spring was doing until Persephone was born, because I don't know. None of this makes sense. The number one crime of this is truly that it is so freaking boring. It took me so long to force myself through this. I am going to do a standalone review for it. I don't know what I'm going to say. I guess I'll provide examples of how freaking boring this thing is, but I gave it 1 out of 5 stars. The final 6 books I read are by Talia Hibbert. This started because somebody asked me over on TikTok what I thought of the Brown sisters, and I still had to read Eve Brown. So I read Eve Brown. The beginning of it was almost a little like torturous for me because the whole dynamic between the two main characters, how they're introduced to each other, she hits him with her car, and I don't know, the antagonism between them, like, I didn't find it cute at all. I wanted to like push them apart. I kind of wanted to punch him. I wanted her to go deal with her stuff elsewhere. There was no part of me that was rooting for them being together. And so by the time it got on and things sort of calmed down, I just couldn't shake that feeling of like not having a lot of investment in the two of them, in their circumstances or in their relationship. So of the Brown sisters trilogy, I think Dani Brown is the best one, then Chloe Brown, then Eve Brown is my least favorite of the 3. So I would give this 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, so after I finished that, I read Guarding Temptation, which is a related book to Wanna Bet, and that one was really fun. It is shorter, so I feel like I didn't get to know the characters too well, but I did like both of them. This is friends to lovers, so there is a bit of them not communicating and just not getting together because nobody will say the words. I often find that frustrating, but here it towed a line where I was able to deal with it, particularly because I understood why they were being sort of careful around each other, and because when they had tried to get it out on the table, it didn't go well. So there was some hesitancy there to like try again. But I also really loved a moment in this when they're finally talking about their relationship, and because there are friends, there is sort of this reckoning of like, don't you trust me to know what you want and what you need? And when it happened, I was like, prime friends to lovers content. So I really enjoyed that one as well. Not as much as Wanna Bet, but more than the Brown Sisters trilogy. So I would give this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Princess Trap, which this one's hard for me to review because I have to admit that I listened to this on audiobook, and I highly recommend that nobody do that because the narrator, oh gosh, it just was not for me, particularly because the prince in the story is from like some invented Scandinavian Scandinavian country. So the accent that the narrator uses for the prince, wow, was not great. I did not enjoy that at all. And I was listening and knowing that the narrator was sort of ruining this experience for me, but I was like already in it. I was like, let me just finish. Now I can't really differentiate my feelings for the prince as a character from my experience of the narrator, like reading him to me. And also the experience was bad enough that I don't want to reread this. So we're going to call this a 3 out of 5 stars and recommend that if you try it, like probably at least preview the audiobook and see if you like it before committing to that. And then finally, I read the Just for Him series, I think it's called. So that's Bad for the Boss, Undone by the Ex-Con, and Sweet on the Greek. And these were good. I like the characters, and Talia Hibbert's like romantic scenes and sex scenes are all generally well done. I liked all of the characters in this just fine. It is the premises that sort of give me pause. They were set up to be certain things that I don't think they fully delivered on those premises, or they took turns that were just a little bit weird. Like we kept ending up in situations that didn't feel completely natural to the story, or that stretched my disbelief in a way that I wasn't prepared for. Like your back of the book blurb and your premise said this, and we ended up just outside of the believability of that. So I was constantly in these moments with the plots where I was like, what? And it didn't let me enjoy these to the fullest, even though, like I said, the writing, the characters were all there. So I would put this series below the Brown sisters. I feel like it's one about Guarding Temptation, then the Ravenswood series, and then this one. But I'm going to sit with that and then do a full author spotlight on Talia Hibbert and really get into the nitty gritty of what works for me from her and what doesn't work. But I'm really proud of myself. This is probably the most I've read of any one author, to be honest. It helps that they're short romances, but still an achievement. That's it for me today, and I'm sure that's plenty. I tried to run through these as quickly as possible so you weren't here for a million years. But if there are any books here that you want more information about, let me know. And if you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, also let me know down in the comments and we can chat about them. Thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video, and thank you to all of you for watching, and I will see you guys soon. Even the back of this book is adorable. I love it so stinking much. And it does, and it is, and to me, it got an